Over the past few weeks, shiny Pokemon have been the most requested Pokemon fact of the day. While I'm sure most fans know what shiny Pokemon are, I'm going to do my best to take it one step further and explain as many intricacies as I can about the reasoning behind shiny Pokemon, as well as the different places they've popped up in popular Pokemon media. In the off chance that you're either a very new Pokemon fan, or you're watching this video in the distant future, shiny Pokemon are special versions of regular Pokemon that have alternate color palettes. When entered in a battle, they give a little sparkling effect, which brought about the shiny moniker. The new coloring a shiny Pokemon receives is anywhere from negligible to drastic, and shiny Pokemon remain shiny as they evolve. Charmander and Charmeleon are gold, but Charizard becomes an extremely cool black dragon. Celebi turns from green to pink, and Hoppip turns from pink to green. Jigglypuff changes to a slightly different color with green eyes, and the ever-popular Pikachu goes from yellow to, well, a slightly darker yellow. But why does this happen? How did it begin? And how can you catch a shiny Pokemon today? I'm hoping to explore this topic in as much detail as I can, so let's try and find out. Shiny Pokemon began in Generation 2, available as early as Pokemon Gold and Silver or the Game Boy Color exclusive Crystal, although it'd be admittedly difficult to spot the differences if you were still playing on a classic Game Boy. Even if you've never encountered a shiny Pokemon in your life from the wild playing that game, it's actually one of the very few moments in Pokemon history where you were given a free chance at capturing one. Remember the red Gyarados in the Lake of Rage? He's a shiny, although he's admittedly a little less special since everyone has gotten the same shot you have at grabbing him. Aside from Gyarados, shiny Pokemon can hatch or appear in the wild in this game based on DVs, or determinant values. These values would be known as IVs, or individual values, in later games. These values, which I'm sure will be brought up in greater detail in another video, alongside the EVs that I talked about in last episode, are the equivalent of Pokemon genetics. Pokemon, like humans in real life, are born with genetic values for each of their major stat categories. Even when perfectly leveled, a Pokemon with better IVs will always be better, meaning that some Pokemon are destined for greatness straight out of the egg. In Generations 3 and onward, IVs in each stat go up to 31, but in Generation 2, they go up to 15. In order for a wild or hatched Pokemon to appear shiny in Generation 2, they need to have the following exact DV stats: 10 in speed, defense, and both special stats, and a 2, 3, 6, 7, 10, 11, 14, or 15 in attack. I know this numbers nonsense sounds confusing, and trust me, it is. But if you're playing Generation 2 and are curious what your Pokemon's DVs are, I've included a DV calculator in the description below. Fun fact, in Generation 2, Unknown's letter is also calculated by these IV-like stats. Ironically, the only letters that can become shiny for this reason are, well, I and V. All values considered, your odds of capturing or hatching a shiny Pokemon in Generation 2 is 1 in 8,192. It's not quite as uncommon as Pokerus, but it's still challenging to encounter. And don't forget, you still have to catch the wild Pokemon if they're shiny. Knocking out a shiny Pokemon in the wild is one of the most painful things that can happen to you in Pokemon, and I don't want to talk about it. Because Generation 2 has shiny Pokemon that are based on their DVs, a hardworking breeder with way too much free time could potentially breed ideal combinations to create more likely shiny combinations out of eggs. Sort of like some insanely complicated Punnett square. A perfect breeding combination could yield shiny odds as high as 1 in 64 eggs, which isn't that bad at all. Because most of a shiny Pokemon's DVs would be 10, a shiny Pokemon is typically slightly more powerful than a random wild Pokemon, but still less powerful than a Pokemon raised with better values. Before I get too deep in this, let's remember, all of this DV calculation stuff is dependent on Generation 2 only, and that's how shiny Pokemon began. So, what about today? How can a modern trainer in Generation 3, 4, or 5 figure out how to capture a shiny Pokemon? Well, in short, you can't figure it out without a cheating device. There's a complicated formula every time you meet a Pokemon involving your 5-digit trainer ID number, a second 5-digit secret ID number that is given to every player and is unviewable, and a Pokemon's randomly generated 10-digit personality value. In a complicated chain reaction, your trainer ID and secret ID are transformed in a binary and then XORed to form a first value. Then, the first 5 and second 5 numbers of a Pokemon's personality value are transformed and XORed. Finally, these last two streams of data are XORed together, and if the resulting binary is less than 8, you've got a shiny. Now before your brain explodes like mine did trying to understand all this, let me make things a little bit simpler for you. The odds of encountering a hatched or wild shiny Pokemon? The exact same as before, 1 in 8,192. Only this time, a shiny Pokemon can have any kind of IV, terrible or excellent. Your odds of breeding and catching a shiny Pokemon can be improved a little bit in Generation 4 and onward too. The first and most popular way to do this is unofficially called the Masuda method, named after Game Freak's Junichi Masuda for programming it into Generations 4 and 5. The method is simple. If an egg is bred from one Pokemon from the game's cartridge origin, and another Pokemon from an outside country, your odds of hatching a shiny Pokemon increase by a pretty good amount. In Generation 4, this method will cause a shiny Pokemon to hatch with the odds of 1 in 1,639, or 5 times more often than normal. In Generation 5, this increased to 1 in 1,366, or 6 times more often than normal. It's still going to be a challenge, but if you really want to get that shiny Pokemon you've always wanted, it might be worthwhile to trade a foreign trainer online. You can also use the Poke Radar to increase your odds of catching a shiny Pokemon in the wild. It's a very complicated process, and I don't use it often because it's only limited to Pokemon that can be found in the wild, but if you're interested in learning more, click this annotation or check the link in the description for a video explaining the process in full. There are very few instances where shiny Pokemon are part of the games, and thus easier to catch. Already mentioned was Generation 2's Red Gyarados, which can be found in the old games, or Heart Gold Soul Silver. In Crystal, the odd egg you receive will have a 14% chance of being shiny if you got it internationally, or a 50% chance of being shiny if you received it in Japan. Hey, that's not fair, but those are the odds. Shiny Pokemon are also rarely given out as event Pokemon, such as the shiny legendary beasts that were distributed from GameStop a few years back. These promotions aren't common, but it's still worthwhile to stay on the lookout. If you want more easy to find shiny Pokemon, you'll have to wait until Black and White 2 is released, where there's a lot of love for shining dragons. By defeating Elder's grandson in the Black Tower in Black 2, you'll get a shiny Gible. If you defeat him in the White Tree Hollow in White 2, he'll give out a free shiny Dratini. In addition, once you've completed the Unova Dex in that game, you can visit the Nature Sanctuary and battle a level 60 shiny Haxorus. There's shiny Pokemon in tons of other games, such as the Pink Celebi in Mystery Dungeon, the differently colored shiny Pokemon in Colosseum and XD, and Nobunaga uses a shiny Rayquaza in Pokemon Conquest. There are also a handful of alternate colored and shiny Pokemon in the anime, but the big one is in Foul Play, where Ash captures a shiny Noctowl. That episode aired over a decade ago, and the main character in the series hasn't caught a shiny Pokemon since. Shiny Pokemon are also available throughout the history of the card game as well. They began as Shining Pokemon, extra rare cards in Neo Destiny and Revelation that were straight up modeled after the shiny Pokemon in the games, most notably the Shining Gyarados that was available when the card type was first introduced. Starting with Team Rocket Returns, shiny Pokemon were introduced as Pokemon Star cards, limited to 1 per deck. From the Black and White set Next Destinies onward, shiny Pokemon have appeared in every set. Each is a reprint of a previously available card. Despite the fact that shiny Pokemon offer no real statistical bonuses, there's something intriguing and compelling about Pokemon in an alternate color that makes them extremely desirable. Whether you use the Masuda method, a Poke Radar, or simply hope to find a shiny Pokemon along the way in your journey, good luck finding, catching, or breeding a shiny Pokemon sometime soon. Boom, 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 boom.